Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen E., marriage and family therapist.
With 35 years experience.
So very old.
Yeah.
Yes.
A very old man. How this works is I present a topic to Steve, which I planned ahead of time, but Steve has no idea about, and we talk about it for an hour or so. Today's topic is, when should couples book an appointment with a therapist?
Huh.
And before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question, so stay tuned for that. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe, share it with your friends and family, and consider leaving a review. So,
hey, I just want to say at the top how great it is for people to have an opportunity for just to listen to two guys talk about managing love intelligently, because I don't think many men or women out there in society have a chance to talk about this at length. And even men who go into psychotherapy for some sort of a need often, get a very limited exposure to this kind of conversation. And like I always say, it's fairly straightforward and simple, but it is a lot more complicated than just falling in love.
Yeah.
So, the dozens and dozens and dozens of hours that we've put into this podcast, I think it's really valuable for people who are trying to figure out how to have a successful love affair. And I just want to commend everybody who's listening to this. And I promise you it's going to help. This question, though, it kind of came out of nowhere. I'm a little surprised because, maybe I suggested it a million years ago or something, but I think it's a really good topic.
Yeah, it's something we talked about, and so one thing I learned from my 3 failed relationships is that you don't want to let a problem go on for too long. That seems to be something I learned.
Well, yeah, that would be a little bit like waiting to get maintenance on your airplane until just before the impact into the desert floor.
So I didn't have that idea. I was just like, oh, it'll fix itself. I thought these problems, like the airplane, it doesn't need the maintenance.
We're in the air. Everything's fine.
It's fine right now. But yeah, if there's a problem and it's not getting resolved by you and your partner, it seems like that leads to resentment, emotional disconnect, and a whole host of problems. Crashing the plane into the side of a mountain, or if you want to continue with that metaphor. But
well, usually what happens with me in my office is people who were quite normal initially in their relationship and enjoying one another's company, and they did so for, say, the first 3 years or 5 years, and then at some point things kind of turn sour, and then they find, say, 10 or 15 years into the future that they haven't had sex for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Or they've had sex but maybe once every other month, and they did go like a whole year without sex, and it's like, yeah, you could wait till that much misery has, gone under the bridge. But why not be a little more sensitive to the fact that, geez, Louise, we've got a real problem here. And because if you get there earlier, it's like treating cancer while it's still young. Mm-hmm. Why not get treatment early? I promise you it'll be shorter and more enjoyable than if you wait until the marriage is terminal, on its deathbed. And then you're already talking about divorce. And then you say, well, okay, the divorce lawyers are really expensive. Let's give therapy a chance. Mm-hmm. And with the idea that you're going to go like 2 or 3 sessions so you can go ahead and check the box that says, well, we tried everything. We even went to freaking therapy. Boy, what a joke that was.
Yeah. But by that point, it's usually too late, right?
Well, it often is. It often is. But my heart breaks when I meet couples who are like at the verge of divorce. They've been miserable for years and years, and it happens regularly. And they're so right for each other. They're like so compatible. they genuinely are still in love and they have so much going on in their relationship with their exchange of humor and everything else. But they have usually, quite often, they'll have some really specific area where they need to make some changes. And so, yeah, I just would encourage everybody out there listening to this, if you think there's a fixable problem and it's a problem that does bother you a bit, to take a look and ask yourself, is this new situation in my relationship sustainable or not? Can I live with this for the next 30, 40 years or not? If the answer is no, then by all means, yeah, get into a therapist. And by the way, I don't mean live with it in the sense of, well, I guess I could endure that. I mean, people, after all, they were in prison that long. How bad can it be? I still get to go to movies and read books. Well, yeah, that's a horrible way to look at a purely elective relationship. I mean, we all need to have much higher standards than that, and to have a benchmark that says, no, I really should be happy in my relationship, and to ask yourself in a moment of quiet reflection, but am I really happy? And do I feel loved? And if those questions are not so much, then yeah, it's time to get into a therapist's office. Now, therapy works. I'm going to caution people listening to this. Therapy, especially if you have a good therapist, it can be highly effective. That's dangerous because it can be very disruptive. In fact, if it's going to be successful, it will be disruptive. So as you're growing in therapy, if you're going by yourself, you're going to be growing apart from your mate, most likely. And so you want to go into therapy as a couple, even if eventually it turns out that one of you has a real problem that would make intimacy impossible in any relationship with any person.
Yeah.
And by intimacy, of course, I don't mean sex. I mean the ability to safely share your life with another person. I know many of my clients who are, for example, terrified of love, and they take great effort trying to avoid the feeling of love because they find it so disarming. They feel like they need their defense mechanisms they learned in childhood, and their mate's attempts to connect and to really love them frighten the bejesus out of them. And so, yeah, how successful are they going to be with anybody? Not.
Yeah.
So, if there are, and I think even then couples therapy is the appropriate way to go, because I think then the mate gets a chance to really understand their counterpart's backstory a little bit better, and to look with sympathy and compassion on really how impaired they are as a result of their earlier experiences.
Okay, so I want to go back to a few things. So the first thing is, you
do sound like a lawyer when you say that. I want to go back to a few things.
I want to go back to a few things.
I feel like a witness on the stands.
It's what I was in a past life. A very successful lawyer when I was
Clarence Darrow.
Early in the 1900s. Now different life now. I came back in this reincarnation. Anyways, recognizing a problem. I think that's the first thing. I don't know if people even know how to do that as far as being in a relationship or a marriage. It's like a problem happens. They feel that it's a problem. They don't know how to address it properly. Like even pre-therapy, like don't you know what I'm saying by that? It's like, how do you?
I do, and I'm shaking my head over here. I'm sorry if I'm misleading you into thinking I don't agree with you. It's just, we as humans, we all come in somewhere on the bell-shaped curve of intelligence, and a similar bell-shaped curve in terms of sensitivity and self-awareness. So if I have a really low bar for what a marriage should be, I just want to be with somebody who doesn't use drugs. If that's the bar, or somebody who's not into a life of crime.
Yeah.
And I could see how that would really work for somebody who had had enough of that lifestyle. Except, it's not enough, because as soon as you get that need met, it's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You get that need met for a while and you realize you need more. You desperately want more. So, using what every therapist does is use themselves and their body as their instrument. So a therapist, if we all hope your therapist is normal, right? We hope your therapist is sane and emotionally well balanced. And if your therapist can use himself as his instrument, so can you. That means your mother or your mother-in-law or anybody else from church who's maybe shaming you. No, you're fine. You have a great relationship. No, if you're miserable, you need to use that unhappiness as an indicator that, yeah, it's really time to take a look at this problem.
And that unhappiness, like how long would you say? Like, is it like a week, a month, 3 months? Like what timeline? Like
if you're unhappy, period, I would start addressing it.
Okay. So period. So it's like right away.
Immediately. Yeah. So talking about it with your mate, or at least trying to, and then talking about it with, say, the friends in your life. I mean, the close friends who you can trust, and anybody else you might trust. You might have a wonderful family you could talk to about these things, and it might be a problem with the children. Maybe you don't appreciate the way your mate treats the children when they misbehave, or you are really concerned that your child, in a family counseling kind of situation, your child is having some serious problems at school. Whatever it is that's weighing on you, of course you'd want to look at that immediately. And of course you'd want to access articles on the internet or appropriate journals or magazines, appropriate books, talking to your spouse or attempting to talk to your spouse about this. Maybe the teachers get involved. But if you can't solve the problem on your own, and your mate and together with you doesn't seem to be able to solve the problem, then you've exhausted those resources, and now it's time to call in a professional. And we don't have to wait until there's gross impairment or something that's so shameful that we can't even fathom the idea of broaching the subject with a stranger, like a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist of some kind. We want to, again, use ourselves as an instrument. So if I'm not happy, let's say it's a sexual issue, my mate doesn't want to have sex with me, and I'm a little surprised and I'm a little put off, and I'm a little even maybe resentful, like why? And I try to talk to my mate doesn't open up. Then I think it's really time for me to go to a therapist. I can invite my mate, but if my mate declines, the best way to get my wife into therapy, the best way to get a woman's husband into therapy, is for the person with the pain to take responsibility for getting some help with the problem. And so booking an appointment with a psychotherapist. And just as we've talked about in other podcasts, a good psychotherapist usually has a few tricks up his sleeve to engage an unwilling spouse into therapy, because after all, it's all being paid for with community income. And to get the other person into therapy to solve the problem or to help their injured, wounded spouse who's unhappy is usually something most people are open to. Now, I say that, and of course, people who know me know that I think people are more important than their ideas and even their marriages. So if I'm miserable and I go to a therapist and my mate is still utterly unwilling to solve a problem that is bound up within the two of us, not just me alone, then I have to reach for the remedy of calling the attorney's office. And I think then it's a matter of divorce, because if I can't solve the problem as a team, I'm still responsible for solving the problem.
Yeah.
And because if one of us tries to persist in a relationship where I'm profoundly unhappy, I'm eventually going to get depressed. I'm eventually going to start behaving badly, perhaps drinking, perhaps taking drugs, perhaps even reaching out for love to some other source, having an affair, whatever. But none of these are choices that I would have normally made. They're made under duress. And if I don't want to make those, then I also need to be intelligent enough to recognize what is sustainable from what is unsustainable. So if it's an unsustainable situation and my mate isn't willing to work on this with or without a therapist, then it's time to let my mate know that I'm afraid this isn't going to be working for me. I'm going to need to go my separate ways.
Mm.
Well, you're not getting the house or whatever it is the mate would say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, then I'll go to a therapist. Well, then, okay, let's go to a therapist.
Yeah.
But I want to solve the problem. I don't want to just go to a therapist and waste a lot of time and money not working on the problem. So that's kind of what I think is the scenario. You have to be willing to admit that you're unhappy and recognize that there's some sort of maladaptive behavior or completely unacceptable behavior. Maybe it's possible our mates change and evolve, because people do.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they're evolving in a direction that I find untenable. I can't see myself staying with them as they go from monogamy to polyamory on their own, for example. And if that's not going to work for me, maybe just getting me to a point where I can fathom the insanity of it all and make my peace with getting a divorce and moving on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a legitimate use for therapy too.
Yeah. So let me break it down to relationships and marriage. So I'll start with the relationships. So say you get in a relationship, it's happy for the first 30 days. On day 31, something makes one of the two people unhappy.
Let's say in your case, you date women, and let's say she becomes abusive verbally.
Okay. She says like, you're an idiot.
Yeah, she does some name calling, and the two of you have already had the conversation about having an abuse-free relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, yeah, I can commit to that. And now it's a matter of confronting her and saying something like, well, did you want to renegotiate our relationship? Because we agreed we were both going to be abuse-free. And she says, oh, stop being such a baby, you big pussy.
And I say, that's strike two.
And three.
And three, yeah.
Well, you're right. It would be strike 2 and 3, but I bring it up because even a month into it, there are going to be deal breakers that make future progress absolutely impossible. And because if we can't agree to be safe together, it's going to be impossible to get to good. To have a good relationship presupposes that we've negotiated how to have a safe relationship. The two of us can be in the same room safely, with no fear of verbal or physical or any other kind of abuse. Well, but if I bring it up and confront my mate, and my mate says, oh my gosh, you're so right, I'm just so embarrassed. I developed this habit in my last relationship, and I really, please just give me some time to work on it. You're right. I totally owe you a blowjob later. And, and if you're happy with that, if you accept that, or if you accept her genuine apology with or without the BJ, then we're good to go.
Yes.
But again, if it starts happening semi-regularly, like 3 months later, it's happening like once a month, twice a month. Yeah, it's not that abuse-free. I just don't want you to abuse me.
Yeah.
That's not a very complicated ask. And for somebody to not be able to give that up, even though they say they want to, then it's time to move on.
Okay. So that's a situation. So say that is a relationship. It's not a marriage. You're not living together, you're not doing any of that sort of stuff. That's a time where you kind of man up or woman up and be like, I'm ending this relationship. This isn't going to work for me. Yeah.
Or this isn't working for me. And the other person's response is, well, stop being such a baby.
Yeah.
I'm just calling a spade, and you were acting like a jerk. Yeah. And well, again, there's no foundation for an abuse-free relationship. Everything's been tossed into the air. And you gotta make a move.
So it's completely gone. Even some guys would be like this. Well, the BJ is really good, so I'm going to stick around.
I've had so many guys say, well, yeah, but she was really good in bed, or, it was really hard to walk away from her. And again, that's the ridiculousness of trying to, have relationships when you don't have a truly happy life before.
Yeah.
Because if you have a happy life before, you realize
you can't go back to that.
You can't go
back to the
abuse.
To the abuse, yeah.
Right, because you get your wonderful happy life restored to you with the other 4 billion women on the planet to choose from. And surely you're going to find some abuse-free women out there that you find attractive.
Yeah, great. So that's a situation though. If it is continuing, you should
absolutely
end it.
Same thing with, I would say, anyone who's really not open to working on any issue that is really seriously bothering you and affecting the quality of the relationship. It could be their drinking. Let's say you didn't even have time to perform your due diligence in the intentional interview, and you've only dated, say, 4 times, and then you find out your partner really likes to drink a lot, or that they really like illegal drugs, or they're really given to, you name it. I mean, fill in the blank with whatever the unacceptable behavior is. And that's not the kind of drama you were hoping to sign up for. And at that point, if you've used birth control properly and you can walk away from the relationship, and essentially that's like breaking up back in high school. And, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. So then let's take that a little step further. So say
going deeper into the dark waters of intimacy.
So say they've been together for a year and it's been all right. They've had some problems that haven't been addressed, but they're living together. And say they're living together, it's been a year, and say drinking, we'll use that example. That's coming up and it's causing unhappiness for one of the people involved. Is that something that they continue to talk about, or do they break it off? But it's like now they're living together, so the stakes are a little higher. So it's like, do you invest? I guess it's like, when do you invest in therapy? Like in this situation, what would you say?
I would say you never spend a dime on therapy until you're reaching a point where the two of you are not able to solve problems on your own.
So say they moved in, they're living together, they just can't solve this problem.
I'm not drinking that much, your partner says. All my friends drink like this.
Yeah.
And I'm sick and tired of you trying to control me. Well, none of that is abusive. I mean, she hasn't said anything that's abusive, and she may be only talking about 1 drink a week. She may be talking about 1 drink every hour on the weekend. So, you almost need somebody outside of the relationship to kind of be the referee. And would you be willing to go to therapy? Yes, I would. I know the therapist is going to tell you I drink within normal limits and it's not a problem. You're just being controlling. And I don't like that kind of therapy personally, because it makes the therapist into an authority figure, like a mom or something. And, well, let's go ask mom. Yeah. She'll tell you it's not okay to smoke pot. I think for me, I go back to Benjamin Franklin all the time, where he says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think moving in at the 1-year mark is still too early, and the scenario and I don't want to, be a whiner about the scenario you painted, but after a year, I really should have found out what her drinking patterns were like. I should have known that before moving in, right?
Okay.
And so you were just thinking of an example, and maybe a better example would be something like, well, now that we're living together, I've had a chance to look over her shoulder, when the credit card bills come in. And I realize, oh my God, she's in debt for, some ungodly amount of money that's vastly beyond her ability to ever pay off. And I would say, oops, that was a big mistake, that moving in with somebody and not knowing where they were financially.
Yeah.
Because I think economic stability is a huge part of developing a life worth living.
What if she says, well, that's none of your business?
Right. Well, if we're trying to make a life together, yes, it is my
Yeah,
business.
I had that scenario happen to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm so glad you didn't tell me, because you would be thinking I outed you like that. No,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
So
I moved in and then got a letter from a court about credit card bills, and when I brought it up, it was like, it's none of your business. And I said the same thing you said, and it wasn't.
yeah, once we're
reciprocated.
living together, pretty much everything is my business.
Mhm.
And I think we have a right to know, particularly if we're thinking the relationship is going to go even deeper. And that was why we moved in together, was to take the next step on a journey that was going to involve steps and steps and steps after that toward the goal. But, you know, I think finding,
But in that scenario, though, really quick,
yeah,
the stuff about, you find out that has these credit card bills or the debt or whatever it may be, and do you have a conversation about it and then try to resolve it on your own? And if you can't, do you go into therapy, or do you just say, well, this sucks, we just moved, but this isn't going to work for me, and we're going to have to,
it depends on your desires, because for me, if you find out and then she's utterly unwilling to address it with you, well, then we're kind of done, because we're not a team anymore. I mean, that's the whole point of getting into a committed relationship, and moving in together is a big step forward in that, because now we're not just dating. We've thrown in with each other in a big way.
Yeah.
And if she's not willing to play as a team member, and we all remember that one individual who could never pass the ball, who always took, the ball and kept it, and never really worked as a team. They thought they were the whole team. If the other person doesn't know how to work as a team, doesn't want to change their ways by even talking about it, because they're too embarrassed, or they're too self-conscious, or they're too whatever, I think that for me, it would be really easy to walk away at that point. Now, for other people, again, who weren't happy beforehand, I think it may be, and I can imagine other scenarios where people are embarrassed, like, I can't believe I got myself into such a stupid situation, and I didn't ask about this, and I didn't find out about it before. Gosh, what are my friends going to think? What's my family going to think? I just moved into this place.
Yeah.
There's all of that, but being humble enough to accept that I made a mistake. Boy, it was a big one, but I can recover pretty quick from this, because for just, a couple $1,000s, I can press the reset button and find my own place and move on with my life and carry on.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I did not do that. And probably because, thinking about it now, probably I wasn't secure in that self happiness, or I didn't do those, like, create a life worth living. That wasn't really in my.
Yeah, that's
mindset.
that pre-gaming that's so essential, right? To establishing a truly successful, intimate relationship. Because for a lot of us who are the ones being left behind, like, say you're the one who is horrified at the bills, and you want to get out, but you really can't, because you're kind of needy, and she's like your everything, and that sort of thing. If that's true, then you didn't pre-game properly, right? And you weren't leading a truly happy life.
Yeah.
So that becomes, again, a reminder to self, like, I really need to get that right this time. But I do need to get out, because this is unsustainable. And it's I don't want to be answering the phone from creditors, or having people knocking on the door. I don't want this place if we're not going to split the rent together.
Yeah.
So I really need to move on. And if she's not willing to solve the problem as a teammate, the other person has the responsibility to make decisions and to take care of themselves the way adults do. That's the difference between adults and children. Children need caregivers. Adults are supposed to have become mature enough to give themselves care. And when they can't do that, they know where to go or who to ask to begin finding help. And she was not willing to do that. And so if you can to leave, and at that point, if you were not willing to leave, it would have been really smart to have talked to a close friend. It would have been really smart, to just tell him the story and say, well, what do you think? What would you do if you were in this situation? And then, or even maybe a family member who's smart, who loves you, who's not judgmental. And
yeah,
most all of us have made so many mistakes. I mean, it's really the whole "I told you so" thing should be extinct by now, but it's not.
Yeah.
So even if I heard somebody give me some "I told you so" stuff, usually if they love me, they're still going to give me some great advice. Here's what you need to do.
Yeah.
And then to recognize that advice really is a path forward. It really makes sense. And then you don't owe your partner or former partner anything. You don't owe them a discussion. You don't owe them any kind of explanation. You do get to just pack your stuff and disappear into the night, because they've made it really clear you're on your own. I'm not working on this problem with you.
Yeah. Well, in my scenario, we solved it, but it was kind of it felt like, again, I don't want to like put her down or anything like that, but it felt for me like it was met with like resentment on what I did, because I did lend her money.
You did not.
I did.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, you poor bastard.
And then, well, she repaid me, but
whoa,
but it was also
lucky.
But it was meant with like resentment. It felt kind of resentful, kind of like, and also like when I had said that's something that should have been like, I wish you told me about it or something, whatever I said. And it was like, it's none of your business. And it was like, it didn't feel like it was done in a way that was the best. I mean, but we did resolve it, and it did get cleared. But
so can I ask you, in hindsight, do you now make a point of finding out before you leap into a relationship?
Yeah, that was the first time I moved in with somebody, and it was one of those things where it happened, and we were dating, and it was going so well. I thought that was a sign, like, oh, it's going so well. That means this is
meant to be.
This is meant to be, and we can move in together quickly. And even before that, there were some signs that I was concerned about, but I ignored them because I focused on all the positive stuff.
As we do.
Yeah. And then I got into that situation, and then like less than a month when we were in the new place, I found out the financial stuff. And then, so yeah. But
did you learn like to never make that same mistake again?
Yes.
So you would ask future girlfriends, so how are you doing financially? Or?
Yeah. If I was moving in with them, like even probably before, I mean, long before. Yes. Yeah. Definitely would have that conversation, but I didn't even think, it wasn't even on my radar of things to even ask. I didn't have the intentional interview where I asked questions. It was just like, no, it's all about just following your heart. And, if it's going good and if it's enjoyable, and then when problems did arise, I
would solve them together.
Yeah. But I would bring them up, and I could feel the resistance to even wanting to solve them or wanting to address them. And
yeah.
And then there were other, I don't even want to, yeah, there's other things too before I even moved in that I had concerns about. And I just didn't have the ability, I didn't have the tools to address it in the way that I would address it now. So that relationship would have never moved in.
You would never have moved in.
Yeah, if I was doing that now.
Yeah, I think for me, the takeaway though is because we're so seldom talking to other people about these things, the guy who goes through an experience like yours kind of chalks it up to a one-off and says, well, I'm never going to make that mistake again. And yet when you listen to a podcast like this, you realize, oh no, the intentional interview needs to be far more broad ranging, far more in depth, because there are all these other things that really could be deal breakers down the road. The thing I think you were very fortunate in that you became the creditor to a woman who was demonstrably poor at managing money, and you got paid back. So that's amazing to me. Because she could very easily have stepped away, male or female, it doesn't matter, who's doing the borrowing or the lending, but it would have been very easy for the other person to claim, that was a gift.
Mm-hmm.
They gave me that money.
Yeah.
And perhaps for some people it ends up being a gift, and then they just repeat the whole scenario and get back into debt again.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever, and I have to ask, I'm sorry, but this came up because I was in a similar situation, but not moved in, when somebody wanted to borrow a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I was telling my friend about it, and my friend, thank heaven, said, well, does she have any collateral?
Mm.
And I said, I don't, you mean like a car or something? No, she has nothing like that. And he said, well, then get her to sign a second mortgage on her house to you so that she can't sell her house until she pays you off. And I took that and I approached her with that, and she never spoke to me again.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to feel
And I realized, the message to me was she never had any intention of ever paying me back.
Yeah.
Ouch.
Yeah, that hurts. Yeah, I trusted her, and it wasn't a ton of money. It was something that I was comfortable with, and I was trusting that she would pay back, and she did, and she got like a second job over like Christmas, and gave me the money back, and it was nice, and got all.
Yeah, but it changed the whole dynamics, didn't it? Because instead of being equals in the relationship, you became her creditor, and that made you the top dog and her the underdog, and I think it just, it ends up so destroying the dynamic of what two people might have, and it's a structural problem. As a therapist, I certainly have lots of compassion and lots of empathy, but I've learned compassion and empathy are, I don't want to say useless, but that's not how I conceptualize relationships. I think of myself as more of an engineer of relationships. And so I'm looking for all the right materials.
Yeah.
Can the two of us build this with this? And just that little dynamic you were describing with your first significant other, it's like, yeah, that's rarely ever going to work out, is it? With anybody.
Yeah.
Even if the shoe was on the other foot and you were the one in debt. It depends why you were in debt. If you got into debt because you paid for your mother's life-saving operation and it was sort of, an unlooked for event, or was it because you just couldn't stop yourself shopping online for more fishing lures and you're collecting, your fishing lure collection is growing and growing to museum quality. That's, those are two very different scenarios. And I could see how if the debt were open, or even if it were discovered and you were humbly willing to acknowledge and you gave the backstory of how it happened, and your bride-to-be said, well, you know what, we're going to take care of this. And the two of you figured out a plan and you solved the problem, that could bring a couple together, right?
Yeah, I that's what I felt like. But then there was like, well, it just felt like she was mad about it. Yeah.
Looking back though, probably you would agree, I'm guessing, that she was embarrassed.
Probably, yeah. I would imagine so.
So she got defensive.
Yeah, It's all that. But when you're just getting started and you're young, all you see is the anger. And frankly, I'm glad that's all you saw, because you're not the therapist. You're just the boyfriend at that point. And so for you, I just think you would probably handle it all more skillfully, even if you got into that same situation. Yeah. Yeah, I would hope so. I think I would. I think it would definitely be better. So let's move on to one more relationship scenario. So say you're in a relationship for 3 years, we've been moved in for a year, and now it's a little more time's invested, and everything was great up till the last 6 months. And whatever the scenario is.
You find out you really don't get along with her son. Now we're talking about my marriage.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, now let's go to you. So then, do you go to therapy? Do you try to solve it on your own first? And if you can't, then you go to therapy. But at that point, you kind of would probably be more wise, I would guess, to go to therapy rather than throw all that away that you built to then?
It just depends. But in my case, like, you find, you and her child, in this case, her son, we're not really getting along. This is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. The first thing I do is look inside of myself and say, okay, what is it about me that's making this so hard? Because I've had a history of being a control freak, of being highly critical. Mm-hmm. Is it just me? Because if it's just me, then I need to grow and, become a little more humble about this. But I would still, I think even in that scenario with my partner, I would feel really comfortable telling her my feelings and my discomfort, talking about my discomfort. And then begin, if I'm not able to solve the problem by looking in and making some changes in myself, then I'm going to, if I'm smart, and I haven't always been smart, but if I'm smart and I'm on my game, I'm going to talk to her about it, because after all, he is her son. She is charged with his care, and I am merely, her partner. I'm not his parent. And so, is there a problem with his behavior, or is he acting like a normal, say, 4-year-old? Or is there a problem with her lack of parenting? Maybe she doesn't want to discipline him for some variety of reasons. And in that case, maybe she needs to look within herself. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then she's doing that. And my bride-to-be at that point looked at me and said, well, what do you think I should do? Because she could see there was a problem, and it was between her and her son. And I really didn't want to become the therapist. And I told her so. And she said, well, what would you do if you were in my situation? I said, well, I would probably go look for some books, because I would want to read my way out of the problem by learning a little something, because I think it's just a skill issue. Mm-hmm. Well, she did that very hour. She got in a car, drove down to a bookstore, bought a book on parenting, read it right away, implemented some of the strategies, and that took care of a lot. Mm. So, boy, did that put me at my ease, and we didn't have to spend any money on therapy.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? What about the one who does that? Let's say hypothetically she does all that, but I'm still really uncomfortable with this kid. Mm-hmm. Well, that'd be something that I'd still want to talk to her about, but then I got to let go, because something's got to change, because I'm just not comfortable. I'm in an unsustainable situation. Maybe it would be best if we called in an outside neutral third party, like a therapist, and I would go to a family therapist for that and see what their take on it is. Mr. Ng, you're still being too controlling, and this is a perfectly normal kid, and he's behaving within normal parameters. Mm-hmm. Or talking to the missus and saying, well, you're really still not willing to take the risk of what's going to happen when you truly intervene in your son's misconduct. Or maybe it's the child who is having some sort of problem with an undiagnosed condition. Maybe, and it could be anything, ADHD, autism, and maybe he was wounded psychologically by some experience in his young life already. So you really want to, do some investigating and find out whose problem is it really?
Yeah.
Are they willing to doing anything constructive about it? Does their remedy result in a situation I can truly live with? And if not, again, then with a tear in my eye, I have to say, I just can't do this.
Yeah.
And then move on, because I don't want to be that stepdad, that one out of all the fables, the wicked stepmother, the wicked stepfather. I don't want to be that one. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather move on than do that.
Yeah. And so let's now shift to marriage really quick. We got about 10 more minutes left or so. So first thing in marriage, do you recommend anyone in marriage to go to therapy if they cannot resolve their problems?
I recommend everyone in marriage to go to therapy, except
before they call it. I'm saying that.
Yeah, unless you have such clarity, if 2 years into the marriage, your mate picks up a cocaine habit and is unwilling to doing anything about it.
It's so clear.
It's so clear.
Yeah.
Or domestic violence, or short of violence, they're just behaving in a really abusive way, or they violated some of the implied warranties of a monogamous relationship.
Yeah.
Anything like that. Those are really pretty clear, right? But strangely, to me at least, they're not clear to everybody. There's so many people. And I think, again,
I could see myself being married and something happening and being like, well, we're married. I love her. And
I've had so many clients like that. I had a client, I brought him up many times. And I think his example, though, is he's deceased now. He died of old age. But I think he was told at the 7-year mark, I don't want to have sex with you anymore. And he stayed for another 40 years. Now, I think, and for him, it was the sacredness of the marriage vow. And I think, that would be a violation of the implied warranty, because who gets married with the idea they're never going to have sex with their partner?
Yeah.
That's just not something people expect. And when someone unilaterally says, I just don't want to have sex with you, I think the proper remedy is to say, sure, you don't ever have to have sex with me again. Do you want to get the same lawyer? Or do you think you need your own lawyer? Because I think it's time to split the sheets, because this is not going to work for me. Oh, fine. Then let's go ahead and have sex, you pig. Well, no, that's not going to work for me either. Because it's not like, I don't want to have this threat of divorce. The whole idea about sex is it's supposed to be an interpersonal celebration of the intimacy we have, and it's supposed to be a joyful, loving experience. Not, with that proverbial revolver put to her head that says it's sex or else. Toots. And the same way about so many other issues. You have to ask yourself, is this really a sustainable model? Is this how I want to live? And sometimes even I am in a situation where I've had to ask somebody else because I couldn't get enough perspective to ask myself those questions. And so at some point, it does help to talk to a third party. But before God ever created therapists, he created friends. So sometimes it's a wonderful friend who has real clarity and what they say makes sense. Sometimes your friend's point of view doesn't really quite make sense. So you need to press on and maybe find a therapist.
Yeah. And sometimes you could hear your friend with the clarity and be like, well, I'm still going to do what I'm doing.
Yeah. And, absolutely.
Yeah.
We all do that. We ignore what our friends say. We ignore what our family says. But then what I have found as a therapist is, and I think some people listening to this are going to probably have part of their life they could use this question. And I ask my clients, whether they have children or not, I say, well, let's follow me in this thought experiment for a minute. If you had a child the same gender as you, and they grew up and got married to someone, and they were in the middle of the same experience you're in the middle of, would you tell them, no, you can't get a divorce. You have to stay? What would you do? And, it's without fail that the most stubborn, intransigent people, sometimes because of their religion, sometimes because of their personal beliefs, sometimes because of their own stubbornness or their own fears, they all, to 100% of them, say about this hypothetical child in the future who they really love and care about, no, I would tell them to leave.
Yeah.
They all say that. And then, of course, people listening to this can readily see that the difference between the advice they would give their adult child and what they are willing to do for themselves, we call that difference denial. They're living in a state of denial, and they're denying reality. Because the reality is not only what's happening, but is this a sustainable event or process for a normal human to put up with? And as they imagine that future child who they really love and care about, they realize, no, That is not sustainable. That is not going to be good for my child.
Yeah.
I would never want my child to stay in an emotionally abusive relationship, for example, or one where their spouse had a compulsive need to spend and just put them in the poorhouse. I would never do that to my child, but you would do it to yourself. Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yes. Okay. So that's such a great way of putting it, and it really clears it up for everyone, I feel like. And then, so let me ask you the scenario then. So say 2 years, you're married, everything's going great. All of a sudden, something happens. You have better examples than I do. What would be something that comes up that's not a universal deal breaker? Oh, a personal deal breaker. Well, sex comes to mind because for a lot of people, polyamory now is all the rage.
Well, let's just say sex changes, or not sex change, but no, let's just say they're together for
the audience couldn't see my eyeballs just explode out of my head.
Let's just say they're together for 2 years and they've been consistently having sex like every day for the last 2 years. Then something changes to where now one person only wants it like once a week
or once a month,
and say they're trying to talk this out, but they can't come up with any sort of resolution. So how long until they go into therapy?
Well, for the man, I mean, once that white substance starts coming out of his ears, I think it's time to,
does it come out of you?
A month? Come on. I think really it's just, you think about your own self and how much bad behavior you're capable of if you're miserable and your needs are not getting met. And would you ever have signed up for let's call it a marriage? Would you have ever signed up for a marriage where your sexual needs weren't getting met? Nobody does that. And the idea that, well, I'm going to continue on in my commitment to get all of my sexual needs met with a partner who's not interested in meeting my sexual needs.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just crazy. So, I think at that point, for me, it's really clear I don't need to go to a therapist. I would confront my partner with saying that's simply not going to work for me, and in fact, I would probably do that within the first week. Yeah, okay. I mean, unless because let's assume this is a loving relationship. I really care about this other person.
You're married 2 years and
and they're depressed because their father died, or they're ill and they're feeling under the weather physically. Well, you know what? I could do without sex indefinitely until their personal problems were resolved.
Yeah,
because they're not really denying me sex or avoiding me. It's more that they're dealing with another more serious problem that is solvable, I hope, unless it's the case of terminal cancer or something like that. But whatever the problem is, it's in sickness and in health till death do us part. So I could be that partner's faithful husband and just be in for the duration. But I'm not going to, just because she decides one day with no explanation that she doesn't want to have sex with me anymore. That would be like my client who died after 40 years of abstinence.
But say you confront after a week and your partner is like, no, well, this is what it is from here on out. You would be like, okay, then it's not working for me. We need to get a divorce.
Yeah. Why wouldn't I? I mean,
because you're married, because you're in love.
Well, okay. So when my clients come into my office in this kind of a scenario, I remind them that I only have 2 clients in the room. The marriage is not a client. The marriage is a relationship construct that describes the desired or actual relationship that they have. And frankly, their relationship is not as important as either one of them. So persevering in a relationship that's so highly flawed, that's not more important than a human life.
Yeah.
Any human life is more important than somehow finding virtue and persevering in a fatally flawed relationship. To me, that seems so self-evident, but I see you kind of got the wheels turning like, I don't know.
No, I believe you. It's just it's society, it's culture, it's religion. I mean, I grew up Catholic and I wasn't ever really fully into it. Just went because his parents thought you had to. Their parents did it, so they did it. So, but I think it's also like getting into like like I love, it's like I think I've grown past that now, like where it's like, well, love conquers all. We've talked about that before, but I have friends who are in scenarios like this, like currently now, where the relationship's clearly not going great, but they stay because they love. And I think that's where a lot of people do that. And I think I'm still working through that idea of, like, actually taking care of myself. Like, because I put my needs aside, and I think that's what people do. They put their needs aside for love, and then they seem to suffer possibly because of that.
Yeah. And again, I could do that if my wife were physically ill or she was psychologically going through a tremendously difficult time.
Yeah.
But even in that latter case where let's say my wife was just sad and depressed all the time, I know that with many people, having sex is comforting because you're being touched in a loving way.
Yeah.
I was talking to a man in prison for years, and he was talking about how any touch between convicts was disallowed, that you were not to even shake hands or to high five each other. And what, we're supposed to endure like that for years? That makes no sense at all to me.
Yeah.
Because humans, that seems like cruel and unusual punishment. And I believe humans have a genetically driven need to be touched.
Yeah.
I don't know any primate who doesn't need to be touched at some point. So, if I'm in a marriage where someone has arbitrarily said, no, I don't want you to ever touch me, and I'm never going to touch you.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, so not what we signed up for, right?
Yeah.
And to say, yeah, but I love her. Yeah, what do you love about her? What is it that, well, and most people fall silent.
That's how it goes.
Because there's really, what they love is the person they first met.
Yeah.
And they remember they have these great memories of falling in love and the loving experiences they've had. But in the here and now, yeah, it's not loving.
Yeah.
And it's hard because it means dealing with change and adapting to that change in a way that is truly adaptive, that helps bring out the best in me and takes me to a higher level. And it's hard for all of us, whether it's the loss of an income and we're down from 2 to 1 income, or we're in a situation where maybe it's not the economy, maybe it's our own aging process. There's a lot to adapt to in this world. And sometimes we have to adapt to people who dramatically change overnight, and we're totally caught off guard. But at the end of the day, our primary responsibility is to take care of ourselves. And that includes even with children, because people do get confused when there are little children involved. But if your mate was, say, snorting coke every other day and bringing home handguns, leaving them laying around, I think it'd be much clearer that, oh, this is not sustainable. I can't have the children around this. Well, we don't have to wait till it gets to that bad before we can say it's not sustainable, or that bad before we say the children need to not be around this. And so just becoming a more thoughtful, intentional person in these scenarios, I think it becomes second nature after a while to make a decision on your own to do as much as you can to remedy the situation. And if I can't remedy the situation, to confront my spouse, to ask for help, to see, can you help me figure this out? Because I can't see how this is going to work. They say, no, basically, they don't say you're on your own, but they say, I think it's fine. They minimize the problem, they deny the problem, or they blame you for the problem. And then at that point, I'm on my own.
Yeah.
Who else is going to make this decision for me? No, it's not like my fairy godmother is going to do that, or my mother is going to come in and say, honey, you don't have to do this anymore. So I've got to go ahead and decide as an adult what I need to do to take care of me. And if I'm not capable of taking care of myself as an adult, what am I doing in a marriage anyway? I mean, that makes no sense. So again, that's why I emphasize pre-gaming any kind of attempt to build an intimate relationship, starting off with having a really happy life and having friends and a career and the economic stability, the emotional well-being that goes with all of that. I just don't think it's possible to build a great relationship unless you have, even in the best built spacecraft, there's always an escape pod.
Yeah.
Every time I've watched Star Trek, there's always escape pods. And it's the same with airplanes. People get like some kind of safety measures if things go wrong, because inevitably things could go wrong.
Yeah.
And will go wrong in certain specific cases. So we want to think this through. What would I do? And I think, for the young people who are in love and thinking about marriage, if you're not gaming out the whole process of leaving the relationship, you really haven't done your due diligence in terms of fantasizing some sort of fail-safe that will keep you protected.
All right. Well, let's wrap up there. And to end, we usually do listener questions, but I'm going to expand on what we're talking about here and ask you a question that I wasn't able to get to. So, but if you do have a question for Steve, visit stevening.com and fill out the contact form. So this question is going to be my partner. So my partner agreed to go to, I'll just pretend. Hi, Steve. My partner agreed to go to therapy, but put certain parameters on what we can and cannot talk about to the therapist. What are your thoughts?
Well, I actually know a woman who was going in for marriage therapy, and that just as the hand on the doorknob of the therapist's office, her husband leans over to her and says, "Don't say anything about the drugs." And it's like,
this was one of your clients or someone you know?
I don't think you need to know.
I don't know that. Yeah, go ahead. Okay.
But it's none of your business.
Okay.
But it's a situation where, like, the one, what are we doing here if we can't talk about the problems? And if the question is, what should a person do? I think the first thing they should do is go in and, well, you could stop right there in the hallway and say, well, then let's just give them our money and go home because we need to talk about everything that comes into our minds, and that nothing should be off limits. Or to be able to go into the therapist's office and not disclose the drug problem, let's say, and to say, but when we were coming in, my spouse said, well, whatever you do, don't tell them about X and whatever. And so I don't know how we go forward if we're not free to talk about X. So I didn't talk about the drugs. I just talked about talking about the drugs. And for my therapist, that's an intriguing challenge. And I think then they get to look at your husband, or, the husband in this scenario, and say, so what would you need in order to feel safe enough to talk about drugs or X, not drugs, because the therapist doesn't know, but say X. It could be sex, it could be drugs, it could be the affair, it could be, whatever it is that he or she is really uncomfortable with. And then you can still have a great conversation about what the other person would need. And usually it's so awkward to keep referring to it as X that most spouses just say, okay, occasionally I like to do a little meth for a month or two.
Yeah. Doesn't everybody?
Yeah. I mean, all my friends do it. Everybody I know does it. So, now we're talking about it and we got through it. But there's really I don't think there's anything to be gained by not bringing it up at all. So I like telling everybody to do it this way, because to not do it is a complete waste of the therapy. It's like going in and I have a tremendous pain in my abdomen, but I'm not going to tell my doctor about my pain. Yeah. It's like, yeah, why would you do that? That's, well, I was embarrassed. My tummy hurt and I didn't think that was something that I should have a problem with. Yeah. It makes no sense, but there are people like that. Yeah. And and it's not just on sexual issues like impotence or sex itself being uncomfortable for a woman. I have clients who are afraid of showing their doctor their growth on their back. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of being told it's cancer.
Yeah.
And they just don't want to know. In fact, it's a miracle they're even at a doctor's house, or a doctor's office, I should say.
Yeah.
So that's my answer.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And that wraps up the show. So thank you, Steve. Thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you all next week.
It's a wrap.
That is a wrap. Goodbye.